Our text for today is from Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. Hear the word of the Lord. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Hi, High Rock. My name is Richard, and I'm on the teaching team here at High Rock. And today I want to ask a question. Have you ever been sitting around like a group campfire or maybe like up late at a youth group retreat and you start asking those would you rather questions? And, sometimes it would be like, would you rather spend an hour in a room with 1,000 spiders or I don't actually know what the second part was because I stopped listening after spiders. I want to know actually from you, like what are some of your most animating fears? For me, I mentioned spiders, but I'm also scared of heights. Recently, I was in Sydney and had a day for some like solo tourism. And I thought, I'll walk across the Sydney Harbor Bridge. I'll get some great photos of the Opera House from across the bay, from the bridge. And so I started walking and I suddenly and keenly became aware of the fact that it is the world's tallest steel arch bridge. Spoiler alert, it's very high. You know what? I trusted the engineers. I trusted the builders. I had faith in the structure. So I told myself, I can do this. This is just in my mind. So I kept going. But then I remembered I was alone. And there was no reason for me to stress myself out for an hour crossing this bridge. Mainly, I realized that I could say I walked on the Sydney Harbor Bridge instead of I walked across the Sydney Harbor Bridge. So I quickly snapped this photo and then turned around and went back. But it did give me a lot to think about regarding fear. And that's what I want to talk to us about today. In our Good Questions series, questions that are from you, the congregation, we have this question: what does fear of the Lord mean? Psalm 111, verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, this verse introduces us to the idea of the fear of the Lord as this good thing. It's the beginning of wisdom. In other words, if you want wisdom, you start with fearing the Lord. And Psalm 111 is not alone. There are other verses that say the same thing. Proverbs 1 verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs 14:27, the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life. 2 Corinthians 7 verse 1, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the what? Fear of God. So the fear of God is talked about all throughout Scripture as a good thing, as a necessary thing, as a desirable thing. This is what we want. If you want wisdom or knowledge or worship, you start with the fear of the Lord. But why is that? I mean, what does fear of the Lord actually mean? Right? What are we talking about here? I think for many of us, we think of this word fear as what I was experiencing on the Sydney Harbor Bridge. Fear as that discomforting feeling that something is not safe. Is that what we're supposed to feel about God? That we should feel discomfort, that God is not safe? Fear the Lord? Well, to start, I think we need to look at some of the fears that occupy our brains, some of the ideas that we think about when we talk about this idea of fear. Things like the fear of spiders or the fear of heights, or maybe for you, it's the fear of flying or the fear of needles. Some of these fears, while quite real and animating, frankly, are not rational fears. Now, when I say that these fears are irrational, I just mean that the size of the fear outweighs the real size of the danger. Now, it's not that there isn't real danger. There can be real danger. It's rather that the size of the fear does not meet the size of the danger. It's disproportionate and what we're calling irrational. So an irrational fear of spiders would mean that a spider, which is harmless and tiny and not venomous and poses zero actual risk to my life or health, would still strike a crippling fear in me. Like when I was growing up and I would just find a spider downstairs and I would just place a cup or a bowl over it, and then I would leave it for the next day when my mother would inevitably find a surprise when she was cleaning up the table. I know. I'm saying it's irrational. Well, this is the point. It's irrational fear. There was no real danger. This was not a venomous snake, a venomous spider in my basement, and yet my fear was overriding my feeling of safety. That same irrational fear of heights prevented me from walking across the Sydney Harbor Bridge that day because I knew I could do it. I knew I wasn't in danger, but I felt like I was in danger. And irrational fear keeps those two things separate, what you know and what you feel. So when we hear the phrase fear of the Lord, our first reaction might be to put a cup over God and say, that's not safe, or turn around and walk the other way because that's not safe. Any question around the fear of the Lord, I think, is trying to reconcile what we know about the Lord and what we feel about the word fear. Does that word mean here to be scared of? Does it mean that we are in danger? Should we be scared of God? Before I answer that question, I'd love to talk a little bit more about this idea of fear because we're not done unpacking this idea of fear. Because fear is not always irrational, right? I mean, sometimes it's actually based in real world, real life danger. Sometimes the fear of spiders or the fear of heights is actually warranted because there's very real danger. I mean, if you encounter a black widow spider or a brown recluse spider or a brown widow or red widow, why are they all named widow? Either way, there is real danger associated with these spiders. So there is a reason for fear, a rational fear. And there are some heights that deserve your attention and respect because they are dangerous. And you should not drive these roads with the same casual approach of driving on I-90 or Mass Ave, if you can call that approach casual. But anyway, there is real danger in these situations. And so the fear of heights you are experiencing is actually warranted and appropriate. It's proportionate to the risk. Now, what are some of those things, right? Some of us fear in our lives many things that are actually based on rational things that are proportionate to the danger that we are entering into. Some of us, for instance, fear where we are headed as a country. And so much of the rhetoric around where we are headed as a country is informing the actions of those in our communities or in our governments or in office or in the streets, as it were. And you know what's shocking is that previous statement that I just said could be applied to whichever side you're actually on along the political spectrum. If you go back and rewind and listen to it again, both sides could actually say that they fear where we are headed to as a country. There is real fear around where we're headed as a country, regardless of how you vote. And as a sidebar, I think that the fear-mongering that we can actually see in the news is actually more harmful to us as a nation than the actual actions that are taking place as a result of that fear. The fear-mongering, the dehumanizing of the other side, the inciting fear in our own base is creating a society where we don't see the other side as viable. We don't see the other side as human. Recently, I got into a Instagram exchange with somebody about something that was going on in the country. And, I could very quickly see how what he was saying and what I were saying were worlds apart. And I very quickly recognized that this fear and this dehumanizing could very easily take over in this text exchange. And so I actually just interjected and I just said, hey, I feel like we need to sit down over a meal and talk about this. And so we're actually planning to do that. But I wanted to counteract the fear-mongering that is happening in our society, which again, I think is actually more dangerous than the actions themselves. This fear-mongering is an effective strategy to mobilize a voter base, but it doesn't bring anyone closer to moving forward as a united United States. Suffice to say, there are things in our lives that are fearful, fear-inducing, that are animating us in fear, that we should have fear about. And we should give respect to things that do have the power to harm us individually or as a society. That respect can be a healthy form of fear. Caution signs on roadways or hiking trails can be helpful to us to be more aware of the dangers around us. That little bit of fear can actually serve us well because it's a rational fear. So we've identified the two types of fear that we experience: rational and irrational fear. Fearing things we should and fearing things we shouldn't. And there's a caution with each of these fears. So the caution with rational fear is not feeling fear when you should, and the caution with irrational fear is fearing something we shouldn't. Well, which of these cautions is the Bible talking about for us? Well, it's sort of a trick question because it's both. The Bible warns us about misplaced fear. The fear of the irrational says, do not fear the things that we shouldn't. But it also warns us to fear, the fear of the rational, that we should fear the Lord. For instance, in Matthew 10, verse 28, Jesus tells his disciples, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, in context, Jesus in Matthew 10 is warning his disciples against some very real danger. He was sending out his disciples to go and minister. And this is what he says in Matthew 10 as his warning. He says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Be on your guard. You'll be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. And then he says, but when they arrest you, and then he says, brother will betray brother to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me. Now that sounds like real danger, you would think. Now imagine Jesus saying, hey, I want you to do something for me. Well, great, Jesus, I'd love to. Where are we going? I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Okay, but I'll be okay, right? Be on your guard. You're going to be handed over, but I will be okay, right? And be flogged in the synagogues. Okay, Jesus, this doesn't sound very good or safe at all. But when they arrest you, arrest me for what? Brother will betray brother to death. Jesus, you're kind of scaring me right now. Like, is everything okay? You will be hated by everyone because of me. Can we talk about this? Now, see, Jesus is saying all of this, and in that context, Jesus continues and says, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. He says, be on your guard. They're going to flog you and arrest you and hate you, but don't fear them. They can only kill the body, but not the soul. Instead, fear God, the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Which, again, dramatic language a bit, but the gist of it is, do not fear others, fear the Lord. Don't fear others, fear the Lord. Even amidst the situation and what the disciples would be facing, the very real danger that they'd be facing, don't fear others, fear the Lord. And even though you may face betrayal and flogging and arrest and hatred, don't fear others, fear the Lord. So what's the irrational fear here? fearing others. That's fearing something we shouldn't. And what is the rational fear here? Well, the rational fear here is fearing the Lord. That's what we should be fearing. So the caution is about fearing others when we shouldn't and not fearing the Lord when we should. So how do we actually fear the Lord? And now we answer that question that I've been asking this whole time. What is the fear of the Lord that the Bible's talking about? Should we be scared of God? No, that's not what we're talking about here. When the Bible talks about fearing the Lord, it's this Hebrew word yirah. And that's the word for reverence, respect, awe. It's talking about reverential fear. You have irrational fear, rational fear, and now reverential fear. A revering, respecting, honoring the Lord. It's placing God in his rightful place in the universe. It's giving God the rightful reverence in your life. Psalm 29:2 says, ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. You're not giving God glory that isn't what he's due, but you're giving it to him rightfully. Hebrews 12:28 says, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. We give God reverence and awe and worship because he deserves it. The way that we fear the Lord is revering God, giving God the honor he is due. When you remember who God is, what he has done, the things and ways that he's been faithful in your life, the rational thing to do is to have reverential fear of the Lord. When you recognize all of the ways that God has taken care of you, the rational thing to do is have reverential fear of the Lord. It's anchoring him in the center of your universe and allowing everything else to orbit around him, the sun. One way that I like to think of God taking his rightful place of reverence in our lives is thinking about the sun. Not sun, S-O-N, but sun, S-U-N. Now, astronomy nuts will tell you that the solar system that Earth is in is centered around the sun. In fact, so much of our daily existence as we go about life is a direct result of the sun. We have light during the day and during the night reflecting off the moon. We have time, days and years as it's marked out how we rotate and orbit around the sun. We have heat as Earth is situated the perfect distance from the sun to get enough heat but not too much. We have oxygen from the sun through photosynthesis in our plants. There is so much that we receive from the sun. So many aspects of our life are due to the sun. It's no wonder that so many civilizations worship the sun as a god. But I can almost guarantee you that you're not thinking about the sun as you go about your life. You're not inhaling and thanking God for the sun because of photosynthesis. You're not waking up in the morning and thanking God for the sun for its morning light. You're not thanking God for the sun now that it's finally consistently above 60 degrees here in Boston. Actually, that one may be true. You may actually be thanking God for that. My point is, so much of our lives are made possible because of the sun. With the sun situated at the center of our solar system, life is made possible. And yet, we aren't always cognizant of its effects on our lives. We aren't always aware of its effects, but everything is impacted by its presence. Friends, this is the same with that reverential fear of the Lord. When we have the appropriate, the proportionate reverence for the Lord, when we place God in the center of our universe, as it were, then what's amazing is that everything else seems to take orbit around God in a way that gives and sustains and flourishes life. Our emotions, our careers, our relationships, our aspirations, all of these end up being affected and locking into orbit with God as the center of our universe. We may not always be cognizant of that impact either. Just like the warmth of a summer day, we can feel the effects of God's rightful presence in our lives as we go about our jobs, as we work within our communities, as we love our families or pursue our dreams. God, in its rightful place, allows us to feel the effect of God's rightful presence in our lives. Another thing that takes its rightful place in our lives when we place God in the center is all of the fears that we have, all of those irrational fears and all of the rational fears as well. Becoming grounded in the knowledge that God is in the rightful place on his throne in our lives, in the center of the universe, whatever you want to call it. But when we revere God, when we worship God, when we honor God, everything else takes orbit around him. And those other fears have a way of finding their rightful subordinate place. And when we recognize the supremacy of God, the centrality of God, the proportionate and appropriate reverence of God in our universe, all of the real fears of real lives, of real people can find its orbit around God. That's how you can say, don't fear others, fear the Lord. The only rational fear is to revere the Lord. And then everything else becomes orbiting around the reverence of God. Don't fear others, fear the Lord. Don't fear the ones that can kill the body but not kill the soul. Fear the one that can kill the body and the soul. In fact, in my preparation for this sermon today, I will say this sermon was not an easy one to write, and I may have had a moment of panic and texted Pastor Taylor about it, and he may have comforted me by labeling my worries as an irrational fear. And so, that's a very real world life example. But in my prep for this sermon, I fell down the rabbit hole of what would happen to us here on earth if the sun disappeared. Like if it, poof, it's gone. Well, of course, we would lose its light. And of course, the planets would stop producing oxygen because there would be no photosynthesis. And of course, we would lose heat. And of course, we would lose our gravitational orbit. But what's so fascinating? Not immediately. Immediately after the sun, poof, disappears, it would take approximately 8 minutes for the last light that left the sun to reach Earth. Then it would go dark. And we wouldn't lose oxygen immediately either. In fact, some studies say that it would be thousands of years. And we wouldn't lose heat immediately either. The global temperature would dip to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit within a week, which I know you're thinking that's like a brisk Tuesday here in Boston. But eventually, within a year or so, the temperature would dip below sustainable levels. But after a year, and without the sun's gravity to ground us, we would just retain our forward momentum in the universe and fly off in whatever direction we were headed to in that moment, as if somebody just cut a tether and we would just float. Why does this matter? Well, I think it's kind of fascinating to think about, but that's not just why. What I find so fascinating about this fact and what's pertinent for us today is that the sun, which, as we've talked about, is so essential to our lives, the center of our physical universe in so many ways, that the moment it would poof, go away, we wouldn't know it immediately. 8 minutes later, it'd get dark, but would our eyes eventually adjust? A week later, it'd get cold, but would we just bundle up? Many years later, it'd get harder to breathe, but would we adapt? We wouldn't feel the effects immediately. And friends, I think it's the same with God. I think God, who is so essential in our lives and our well-beings and our pursuit of our careers and our families and our dreams, and when he is the center of the universe, things are aligned. And yet, when we do not appropriately, proportionally fear him, revere him, don't place him at the center of the universe, I don't think we notice immediately. Maybe 8 minutes later, we start feeling anxious about something. Maybe a year later, we fear the future of our families or careers. And many years later, we find it harder to feel peace or joy, a love. I don't think we notice it immediately, but the effects are there. The effects of not having God at the center of our universe are there. Right? Fear the Lord means to revere the Lord, to have a reverential fear of the Lord, appropriately placing God in his rightful place in the center of our universe, which is the only rational fear that we should have. Put God in his rightful place in the center of our lives and allow all of the other fears, other dangers, other concerns, not become the irrational fear that we place at the center. We can allow those to take orbit around the centrality of the goodness of God, for them to take their rightful place neatly in orbit around the God of the universe, the God of our universe, the God of your universe. So let us today fear the Lord, revere the Lord, place him in the center of our lives. Amen.